Hey guys, what is up? My name is Megan. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. And welcome to today's video, which is another middle grade book recommendations video. I say another because I've done a lot of these in the past. I talk a lot about middle grade on my channel. It is my most read genre, and it is the thing I like to talk about most because it sparks joy, and I do not think this genre is talked about enough, especially adults reading middle grade. My last middle grade recommendations video was 4 months ago, and so this is kind of the stack of books that I've read since then that I would recommend for you guys, keeping in mind I am primarily a middle grade fantasy reader, but there are a few exceptions of like middle grade contemporaries within this stack. If you're interested in hearing about more of my recommendations, I will leave that playlist down below for you, as well as all different like full-length reviews of books that I could have created about any of the books in this stack. If you want to hear more about those specific books, I will leave all of that down below as well. If not, there will be timestamps as well, and let's just hop on in. The first book I have to talk about is one that I don't own physically, so I'll pop up a picture, but it is also one that I have a full-length review of, and it is The Secrets of Underh by Carrie Wallace. This is a book that I had like a advanced proof of and that I have read and reviewed for you guys, and it is a really interesting book because it does have a little bit of magic, but it also feels very much like a contemporary novel. So if you are a contemporary reader who wants to kind of dabble in fantasy, this is a perfect entry point. The Secret of Underh is a story about this young girl and her mom, who in the world where they live in, they kind of take care of these trees, and they travel all around the world, well, you know, the area where they're in, to kind of help people take care of them. When the trees are sick, they go and they try to figure out what it is, like is it a parasite, what it is that is making the tree sick. But we learn very early on in the story that there is this kind of sickness that nobody is able to figure out that are killing these magic trees. And so they go on this adventure in Underh to figure out what is happening. This is a really interesting story because the world is really interesting to read about. I love the magic system and the way that the trees are magic, and the conversations about the importance of like caring for your environment and how people consider profit over the environment, and all of these discussions being brought in a story that is both very whimsical and also very like contemporary feeling, and I really liked the blend of both of those things. So if you're someone who likes to read about the environment, if you have or want to have this like conversation with your children, this is a really great book, but it's also just a fun book overall. I will say there was a slight issue of pacing for me that I talk about more in my in-depth review, but overall I highly recommend this book, specifically for those topics, as well as for people who want to be slightly introduced to like fantastical elements in a contemporary feeling world. And this world building is unlike anything I've seen before. I liked the main character as well as the side characters. It was very enjoyable overall, and I do think it's a slightly underhyped. It released like early this year, and I have not seen anybody else talk about it, so it's definitely one of my recommendations. Then for a more obvious recommendation, but I feel like I need to include it because who am I if I don't, it is Kikis Delivery Service. This is a book that I read for middle grade March, and I had never seen Kikis Delivery Service. I had never read the story, and I really enjoyed it for some very specific reasons. One, this is exactly what I envision a middle grade witchy book to be. It is not taking itself too seriously. It's not over the top. It just feels very realistic, where I could definitely see myself living in a world with witches, and I really enjoyed that about it. And I also enjoyed that this is very episodic and slice of life. We follow Kiki as she goes on this kind of year transformation that every witch goes through, where she upheaves her life and has to find a town to live in without her parents for a year and make herself useful as a witch. And we see Kiki navigate throughout this, and I thought that was the most charming part of it because we saw real slice of life moments of this character, and it was just like sometimes she's clumsy and she's not always the best like in judgment, but she feels her age, and it all is just so charming and delightful. It is a short book. It's very like perfectly paced, and for me this is exactly the kind of book I'm in the mood for when I say I want a witchy book. I don't know how to explain it other than I would read 100 of these books. It was so fun. I really liked that Kiki had a kind of animal companion with her cat, which they can communicate, but not everybody can communicate with animals. It's like they have that specific bond, and all of it was really beautiful. It's very child friendly, obviously, and it is a story that could be read time and time again. I think this is a kind of classic for a reason, in the sense that it is very timeless. Is this the most perfect book I've ever read? No, but does this feel exactly like what you would want to read either on a gloomy summer day or like a cozy fall day with a cup of hot chocolate? Those are the vibes. It is such a delightful story, and I know everybody knows Kiki, but I would have felt bad leaving this out because I had such a blast reading it. So if you've seen the movie but haven't read the book, I recommend reading the book. Then we have a book that I personally love. I know is a little divisive from what I've seen on like Storygraph and Goodreads, but I need to recommend this book because I had a blast reading it. It's definitely a contender for one of like my favorite middle grade books that I've read so far this year, and that is Mia and the Lightcasters by Janelle McCurdy. This is the first in a trilogy of middle grade fantasy, and it follows Mia and her younger brother, and essentially in this world there's this kind of like forever night that was cast upon the world where they live in because of the Reaper King, and he is now a figure that kind of doesn't exist, only kind of exists in your nightmares. But the really interesting part about this is that the way that they keep the city safe is there's a special few people who can bond with Underhs, who are the kind of creatures that you can see on the cover of this. And when people bond with them, they kind of, you know, become mutually connected to each other, and they develop powers and they work together to kind of keep this city safe. But at the beginning of the story, everybody who is bonded with an Underh, including Mia's parents, who are in charge of keeping the city safe, are like kidnapped, and it is up to Mia, her brother, and a few other people who are introduced in the story to kind of save the day. What I really enjoyed about this is we have a main character who is very realistic, because she's not like, yay, let's jump into this adventure and like go on full speed without reflecting on anything. She's the kind of character that kind of reminds me of Amari from Amari and the Night Brothers in some ways, because there's a lot of reflection going on, and the story and the pacing and the character arc of this character feels really realistic. I also really enjoyed the Underhs, and again, I think they sort of make me feel like I do when I read the unicorns in Skandar, because they have the same kind of bond that like both provides powers, and they both are mutually invested in this bond with a creature, and so that kind of gives off those vibes, and it's just overall an accumulation of everything I love in fantasy books. Now I know this may be the first video that you see of me, but and what I'm gonna say next may not be of any reference to you, but if you like any of my middle grade favorites, I definitely do think that this is one for you, and I do definitely think that this is criminally underhyped, because this is top tier fantasy in my opinion, and the audiobook for this is absolutely fantastic. This is going to become a go-to recommendation. I should be reading the next book in this series next month, and I'll know better if this is going to be like a favorite series or if this was a kind of one-shot wonder. But I do still think it would be a perfect book to read even if you don't want to go on with the series, because it kind of finishes off, but you know there's going to be more. So yeah, and if you don't know what my favorite books are, I will leave that middle grade video down below. I have a video explaining my six favorite middle grade books, so that could be a reference point for you with my recommendation videos. But just know, if you're anything like me, or if anything I said kind of intrigues you, it's enough. You should really pick it up. Then we have The Rescue of Ravenwood, which is my contemporary pick and a recommendation within this video. This is a story that is similar to The Secrets of Underhill, but I did prefer this a little bit for some reasons, and then enjoyed The Secrets of Underhill a little bit for other reasons. But this is very much a contemporary, and it follows 3 different characters who all go to Ravenwood for the summer, and they're all kind of interconnected, and we follow them on their lives during the summer. Each one of them struggles. Some have familial difficulties, others are struggling, you know, in their lives, they all have these issues and they're all together for the summer in Ravenwood. But at the beginning of the story, Ravenwood is in danger of kind of not existing anymore, and so our friends here have to rally together to kind of keep the place they love and they feel like is home safe. And obviously through that we follow them through their own personal journeys, but also through the journey of saving the place that they love. This obviously also tackles themes of environmentalism, but it also talks a lot about your sense of belonging, found family, what it is to feel like you are welcome at home, and all the difficulties that can arise with having a family and not necessarily always aligning or wanting to do what your parents want to do. I think that the friendships in here are absolutely beautiful, and the scenery and the feeling you get from reading about like characters who feel like they belong in such a beautiful and just like dreamy place, and such a place of like your childhood. I could see myself and remember places that I love as much as these kids love Ravenwood. And it's really interesting because this really talks about the power of choice and how your different choices will dictate your life. And I just really loved the writing style in here, the pacing. I think that there are a lot of beautiful quotes. This is one that I feel like even as an adult you can get a lot out of. I mean, you could do that with every middle grade, but there's something about this book that made me reflect on my childhood and my life and what like I value, that I would be willing to fight as hard as these kids. And it was a really interesting reading experience. Is this a book that I think about every day? No. But do I think there's a lot of worth in it? Yes. It's not like as entertaining as a middle grade fantasy, but that is not the job of this book, and I think what this book set out to do, it did perfectly. So if you're someone who enjoys contemporary stories or books about the environment or just the feeling of nostalgia of being a child and having all of these things going on in your life, but also wanting to enjoy your summer, I feel like this is the perfect fit for you. We then have a book that I feel is more of a common recommendation, and that is Greenwild, The World Behind the Door by Perry Thompson. This is again the first in a middle grade fantasy series. Book 3 comes out in the month of June, so it's a perfect time to be recommending book 1. This, I will say, I liked, but I'm not as obsessed with as everybody else, but I think it might have been a me thing and not necessarily the book's fault. And I will obviously be continuing on with the series, and I enjoy it enough to recommend it to you guys, but it's not maybe as much of a like absolutely obsessed with as Mia and the Lightcasters. And I say this because I feel like everybody expected me to love Greenwild, and I did like it enough to continue, but it's, you know, I have a complicated relationship with this book. Greenwild is interesting, one, because I really think that our main protagonist is interesting to read about. She is... I always forget. I know she's from London, but her mother is from somewhere else, and I feel like the representation in this is what makes it really interesting. But again, I've read this a few months ago, so now I've forgotten. But our main character is not white, and I really enjoyed all of the cultural things that were brought into this book, and I thought it was really interesting. Persian. There's Persian because our author is half Persian, I believe, and there is Persian representation for her character. I believe that is it. So I don't see that a lot in middle grade books, so I thought that was really interesting. And I really also like our cat, who is the main, like the side character that you can see right here, Cutie Pie. So essentially what Greenwild is that we follow a main character whose mother is like a journalist, and they travel all around the world together, and her mom writes these articles and she's very famous, and they go around the world like that. At the beginning of the story, her mom is going on this kind of adventure to write about, you know, for her journal, but it's the first time that she's like, you know what, Daisy, you can't come with me. You're going to go to this boarding school. And obviously Daisy is not pleased about it, and ends up kind of escaping boarding school when her mom goes missing, and she stumbles upon the world of Greenwild. Now, I thought all of this was going to be like on a mission to find her mother. However, the story very much differs from that, so it's not necessarily a fantasy mystery. It's more of a fantasy with a dash of mystery, because the missing mother to me actually was kind of an underlying plot of the story, but it's a lot about the discovery of Greenwild. And I will say, I listened to the audiobook of this. I liked it enough, but I don't know if it's the right choice, so I'm not like buck-ho on recommending the audio for this, but I do think it's good enough. Now, I think what's interesting here is, one, obviously the world building, because Greenwild is very much like a botanical world. Just I feel like this map will give you the vibes you need to understand what Greenwild is. It is very much like a botanical wonder, and I'm a plant girly, so this like fueled my heart. And we have like a boy who can talk to animals, a cat. I love the cat. He's very spicy, and I love that. And it's really a story about finding yourself, and also like, again, we're in the themes of like saving a place, so Daisy kind of has to save Greenwild in a shape or form. And so, as I mentioned, the mystery of the mother, which I personally thought was going to be at the forefront of the story, is not necessarily, but that is a me thing. I think I misconstrued what the story was, but if you read it for what it actually is, you are going to have the best time. I think this, again, is very immersive. I loved the world building, the side characters I think were really interesting. I love that, again, this is very fantastical, but because the world feels so like you're walking in a botanical garden, it kind of feels like you're rooted at home, but with all this magical wonder, which I really appreciated. I loved the character points of our character. She's not like my all-time favorite character, but I do think that she's very charming, and there's a lot to love and learn from Daisy, and the writing is good enough. As I said, I think this is a series that is going to be built upon, and from like book 2 or book 3, I'm going to absolutely be obsessed with this. But I do think a lot of people love this book for what it is, and it's really more of a I probably did not understand going into it. But if you understand what I'm saying, and it's not necessarily about her mother, and you can take that out of your noggin, you are going to love this. This is such a fun world. I feel like it has a unique twist on middle grade, but also it keeps the charm of everything I usually love in middle grade. So this is definitely an easy recommendation, and I think a lot of you would enjoy it if you've liked other, again, books that I've loved in middle grade. This is probably a book that would fit for you. We're down to the final 2 recommendations for this video. This is probably the easiest recommendation I have for the year, and that is The Last Dragon on Mars. This is the first book in a middle grade sci-fi fantasy series, and I have blabbed about this book a lot on my channel. This is definitely a highlight find of the year, and I highly recommend the audiobook for this. It is fantastic. The Last Dragon on Mars follows a main character who is called Lunar Jones, and he was basically born on Mars and lives at this relocation clinic with a bunch of other kids, and these kids kind of don't have parents. And Lunar Jones is not old at all. This is a middle grade story, but he takes it upon himself to care for the other children at the relocation clinic by going and scavenging for like pieces of scrap and metal and stuff and selling them, and that's kind of how he feeds these kids. And so he feels kind of like a little bit older of a main character, not a YA character, but he's very much on the verge between both. And this is a Simon and Aladdin, my bad, and it says ages 10 and up, and I really do feel like this is the higher end of middle grade. I just want to put that out there. But that is what he does for these children. So we are located on Mars, hence the sci-fi element, and we follow this character who's trying to care for children that are only a few years younger than he is. By the way, I love Lunar. He is a highlight character. I love him, and I can't wait to see his character develop even more. But basically, when he's out on one of his like scrap expeditions, something ends up happening, and he ends up kind of having to run away and ends up like hiding somewhere and finding out that there is a dragon on Mars that nobody knows about. And then he ends up having to work with this dragon as well as a team of kids. And it's the coolest thing ever. The lore of the dragons in this story, you guys, I cannot sell you this book enough. It is so thought out and so incredibly amazing. So basically in this world there are dragons. There's dragons on Earth. Every kind of planet on the solar system has dragons, but Earth has more dragons than Mars. And so Earth is kind of the wealthier planet and Mars is kind of like good luck Chuck. But things change knowing that there's a second dragon on here. And so within this story, you learn about all the lore of the dragons and how they are important politically and just like economically to a society, and how they actually contribute, and how because of dragons people can actually go from Earth to Mars. And all of this travel and all of this world building is absolutely insane. Just talking about this book, I want to reread it. This has the potential to be an absolutely insane series. Like, I cannot tell you how much this is incredible. It is breathtaking. The character building is flawless. The world building is flawless. Being in this world with this character is the best thing that this author could have done. Everything in here makes sense even though it's fantasy and sci-fi. This is perfectly paced. The writing is phenomenal. This is absolutely incredible, you guys. This is definitely a standout for me. And like, now I have 7 favorite middle grade books because this is absolutely bonkers, and it made me want to explore the sci-fi genre more because I am not a sci-fi girly. Not at all. This makes me want to reconsider that, especially knowing that like I can enjoy being on another planet so much, and just all the world building was so fun to learn about. So again, this is a series. The next book comes out I think in October of this year, so you gotta read this book as soon as possible. This is the beautiful first edition, and I cannot sell this enough. Even if you don't read sci-fi, I think this is worth the read. Even if you don't read a lot of fantasy, I think this is worth the read. This is the perfect combination. If you like dragons, it's worth the read. If you like a little bit of an older middle grade character, chef's kiss, this is perfect. And we are down to the last recommendation for this round of recommending middle grade books. We have The Marvelers by Danielle Clayton, which is again the first in a middle grade series. This series is complete, and so you can read all 3 books in the trilogy right away if you want to. This was an unexpected, really like, I was obsessed with this book, but it was very unexpected. It's been sitting on my shelf for quite some time, to be honest, and I picked it up. I don't even remember why, and I devoured it. Again, this is one where I highly recommend the audiobook. It is fantastic. And this is also underhyped. I think it got a little bit of buzz when it first released, which I cannot even tell you when that is anymore. This is also the Afterlight edition, Owl Crate edition, and this was in 2022. So it's been a few years, but I know back in 2022, I feel like I've seen a few people talk about it. The Marvelers is a magic school story, but the magic school is in the clouds, and it essentially follows a young main character who is a conjurer, and conjurers are not so appreciated by the Marvelers, who are the ones who have this magic school in the clouds. However, in an effort to kind of reconnect both communities who both have magical powers, conjurers are for the first time invited to attend the Marvelers school, and our main character, who is named Ella, I believe, yes, Ella, is the only conjurer child who's like, bet I'm gonna go. And so this is a story of a conjurer going and exploring her powers as well as her powers as a marveler in this magic school, while also having to deal with all the stigma and all the hatred and all of the prejudice that people have about her kind. So we learn in this story what a conjurer is, what a marveler is. We have this magic school which we attend, and then we have to deal with all of this stuff that our character is going through, and I thought it was phenomenal. This feels sort of Chosen One, but not necessarily, because there's a lot of adversity to face in this story, but I do think our main character has a lot to provide. She puts a lot of stress on herself, and she wants to be like such a good image of Conjure. She wants to make her family proud. There's a lot on the line for her character, and I do think that made for interesting character development. I think there's a lot of mystery and whimsy and magic in this, and it's just the perfect dose of a magic story of like a magic school with important topics like racism and just all of these other things that you can easily connect with double meaning to our world and the difference between different races and the prejudice that marginalized communities face. And that was really interesting to read about, because it's not so in your face that you're like, this is not like an enjoyable story, because I feel like I've read maybe 1 or 2 books like that the double meaning was not so well crafted. I think it's an important topic, but this author weaves all of this together in an incredibly charming and fun story. This was action-packed, it's fast-paced, you get to know this character so well and love her so much. The side characters are all so fun. The school and the magic system was so interesting to read about, and again, this feels like such a classic middle grade fantasy. If you like, again, I'm going to say it again, some of the same books as I do, this is an easier recommendation. This, Me and the Lightcasters, The Last Dragon on Mars, they're such like, for me, typical middle grade fantasy that I cannot get tired of, and they are just so fantastically written and crafted, and props to these authors because they create such incredible worlds and such incredible characters with beautiful meanings and just such delightful stories. This was really, really fun, and as soon as I finished book 1, I was like, I need book 2, and I did go ahead and purchase book 2, and I really want to keep going with this series as well because it was such a fun time. This was a fun experience. Reading doesn't have to be a chore, and these books really prove to us that reading is fun. Like, straight up, reading is fun. So those were all my recommendations, you guys. We have this stack of book here, plus the Secrets of Underhill, which was also a recommendation of mine that I still don't own a physical copy of, but that's fine. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about these books that you want me to answer, do let me know in the comments down below. If you want to let me know that you were here, leave me a stack of books, and I will be back very soon with another recommendations video, hopefully, and lots more bookish content. Bye guys! Happy reading!